New alarm bells ringing tonight on the coronavirus outbreak in this country.
Doctors say the virus is spread through droplets when someone coughs or sneezes.
And I think the business community, it's in their interest that people actually stay home and stop the spread.
For a business that can allow more employees to telecommute, we want you to do that.
Hi, friends. I'm Andy Paul, host of the Sales Enablement Podcast, and I want to encourage you to listen to my brand new special 6-part podcast miniseries titled Selling with Purpose. The team behind Sales Enablement Podcast and I put together this incredible series of inspiring conversations exploring what it means to sell with a mission greater than just hitting your numbers in this era of COVID-19 and beyond. So tune in to hear from world-class enterprise sales leaders and learn how their 6 companies will close $50 billion selling remotely. See how they've supported essential workers with the products and services they need to stay safe and thrive during this time of crisis. Subscribe to Selling with a Purpose now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Guided selling from RingDNA makes your entire sales team more effective by revealing exactly what reps should do and when to do it. Guided selling works by transforming sales data into a curated list of prioritized sales actions. So when reps start their day, they'll never again wonder which prospects and accounts or hot inbound leads to reach out to next. Guided selling even shifts reps' priority in response to real-time buying signals. Finally, even new reps can sell like seasoned ones. Let RingDNA be your guide to success. Learn more at ringdna.com/guided selling. That's ringdna.com/guided selling.
It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 747 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record. I have another excellent episode lined up for you today. Joining me as my guest is Pat Morrissey. Pat's the Senior VP and General Manager of Upland Software's Altify CRO Solution Suite. And today, we're going to be getting into the details about the emerging customer revenue optimization space in the whole world of complex B2B selling. And we'll also touch about how to maintain sales momentums in your pipeline, your closing deals, while you're in the midst of being acquired and integrated into a new organization. So among the topics Pat and I will be talking about today are why sales needs to change its perspective. Instead of working out your strategy to get a customer, to close the customer, consider the customer strategy first and how you will help them fulfill it. We'll talk about why it's important to understand what's your customer's personal win. I mean, if you understand the person you're selling to, you sell from a genuine place for a meaningful win. So you have to understand what's in it for them. Because after all, as anybody listening to this show knows, I firmly believe selling is a business of human connection. We'll also talk about why, no matter what sales methodology you use, you have to look at the underlying behaviors that are captured in your data and decode which behaviors truly correlate with improved sales results and impact. I mean, it requires much more than the superficial analysis we see so many people tout with their products, and it requires more rigorous analysis than most managers are applying today. So we'll get into that. So let's jump right into it. Pat Morrissey, welcome to Accelerate.
Thank you so much, Andy. Pleasure to be here. Really appreciate it.
Well, pleasure to talk to you again. The last time we spoke, I was on your podcast.
Yes, you were, and we had a multifaceted, great conversation that went in several different directions. So I appreciate the opportunity to show up on your home court and be subjected to your side of this discussion.
Well, yeah, we will probably have a multifaceted discussion here today as well. So give us a little bit of your background, because you've sort of shifted. You were formerly with Altify, and Altify, since you and I spoke, was acquired by Upland Software. So give us a little background on what Altify did and why Upland was interested in acquiring them.
Yeah, it's a good question. Altify, we traditionally thought about ourselves in the space of what we've called customer revenue optimization, which is really engaging with large B2B organizations who are in the complex selling world. Complex products, sales cycles in months and years, not in days and weeks, selling to very sophisticated large customers. So think Workday, Honeywell, Salesforce, GE, etc. And our value proposition around customer revenue optimization is all about the intersection of strategy, methodology, and technology. So how do we help organizations align their go-to-market strategy and really organize not just the sales, but the entire revenue team around an account plan to go really deep with the customer, number one. Number two, from a methodology perspective, how do we help them either instantiate the methodology that they have or bring methodology to the party, which is really about getting everybody speaking the same language and doing the same thing in the same way every day. And then the part of the aha and our differentiation is technology. Is we've got a set of Salesforce native applications for sales process management, for opportunity management, and for account planning, so that the idea of training and best practice and methodology isn't something that's theory and in people's heads. It's something that's reinforced day to day in technology. And we had a successful company doing that. And when we were approached by Upland has really been focused on how they build out the best in class, sales and marketing portfolio with a set of technologies that are really about enabling, sales and marketing, but ultimately the whole revenue team. And part of our value add to what they already had, because they had capabilities around, and what some of your listeners would know is, Covidian for proposal management, or RO innovation in the reference management space, or Kapost for really content operations, content orchestration. How do you really facilitate the buyer journey? And
so part of the sales enablement space, as people would say, yeah.
Absolutely. And that's where the conversation started. But sales enablement, and sometimes some of those things are nice to have or auxiliary, versus our value proposition is all about what does the CRO and the head of sales need, and how do we help her and her entire team. So the thesis behind the acquisition is really not just to enable growth, but to really start and change the frame from sales enablement to a strategic value proposition for the head of sales, and then a series of capabilities to help really activate the entire revenue team and generate the outcomes for customers.
Okay, so let's dive into that, because this is sort of, in addition to you guys, more people are talking about this customer revenue optimization. So it's, if you're a CRO and you're getting involved in this, how's life change for you? And are you guys still? You said you have software, but you're also delivering consulting service with this. How does change take place within this organization?
Yeah, and I think it really starts from generally what we would tend to see is a couple problem statements around either pipeline development or more strategic prosecution of opportunities. But if you zoom out for a second to the market context that I think informs your question, Andy, the reality is that the entire world has moved to a subscription economy. And you and I were talking about before we started, being at sales kickoffs and doing keynotes. And I was at Honeywell, the Connected Enterprise group of Honeywell, doing a keynote for them, last week. So this is the IoT and the connected area of Honeywell. Right. The reality for Honeywell, which lots of people know is an old line manufacturing company, is they're in the software business. Right. Every single company, regardless of the business you're in, is in the software business. And so that means you've got to rethink the entirety of your go-to-market model, your process, your methodology, your approach. And what that comes down to the heart of your question about how does this change for the head of sales or for the team is a couple things. Number one is I think that the high ground in sales is not just sales anymore. It is, in fact, the entirety of revenue, and that whole end-to-end life cycle, because we tend to think in the old world of there's heroic work done by sales and you pop out the end of the funnel and then you're a customer. In a subscription-based world, the renewal is at least as important as the new logo sale. Sure. And so you got to be thinking about not just the sales team, but the entire revenue team. How do you activate everybody? How do you deliver value in every interaction? And how do you really focus on not what's your strategy for the customer, but what's your customer strategy and what unique value are you providing to help them execute and drive outcomes?
Well, it's a great point. So how has that helped or hindered? Because we've certainly seen the trend toward more specialized roles in sales, and I think one of the problems that's generated, at least in some instances that I've seen, is this sort of disconnect between that relationship that you build up to get the initial order, and then you sort of lose momentum as you move into the customer success. And maybe the customer success people, quite frankly, just aren't trained in the same way to be able to spot business opportunities and really develop the account. And so how do you help that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think your observation is spot on. And we tend to talk about that around here as the lost in translation problem.
Yeah,
I think the big rush that everybody's made over the last decade to being data driven, there's no organization who doesn't claim to be data driven, right? But when you put that into context of the day-to-day operating roles we all have, you have a problem, because from a customer perspective, if I'm talking to the business development team who's trying to get in touch with me, I end up being a lead score or a propensity to buy metric that informs my cadence and my outbound. If I'm actually engaged in a sales conversation, then I'm somewhere in the funnel and I'm a forecast probability and a deal size. And then I get to finance and I'm AOV or DSO, and you get out to customer success and I'm an NPS score, right? The big problem with that is none of those numbers talk to each other, and none of those numbers give any real fidelity to who am I, what do I and my organization need, and how are you going to help me do that? And so I think it comes down to what we would say that, hey, all these things decompose very simply into people and problems. Do we really understand what problems the customer is trying to solve? And can we articulate them both inside the building, across functions, and outside the building back when we sit down with the customer to say, here's what we understand about you, your goals, your pressures, what are the strategic inputs that you have and the initiatives you're taking, and what problems you're trying to solve that prevent you from doing the right thing for your customer? And how do we also map the people involved? Because to your point, one of the things that I think is a disconnect in this conversation is I'm a CSM and I'm looking at NPS or I'm looking at support, and I may even be responsible or at least an input on the renewals team. I don't know who I'm talking to. I don't know what problem we're solving. I don't know what the scorecard is on the customer side to say, did we hit the mark? And so what you've got to be able to do is visualize that in your CRM and in your system of record, both who are the people, do we have an influence strategy? Not just do we know who we're talking to, but do we understand who's who in the zoo, what influence we have and what behaviors and who they are and what they need? And also very concretely in a one-pager kind of a view, who cares? What problem are we solving and how are we moving the needle for them?
So how are you seeing this sort of borne out in terms of how customers are perhaps your customers are changing their sales processes, their sales structure? I'm sort of interested in seeing if since we've gone down this path, you said for the last sort of 10 years about this hyper specialization.
Yep.
And certainly I talk to companies who are saying, well, yeah, in some aspects, this just isn't serving us, especially those selling more complex systems. What are you seeing in terms of how CROs are perhaps re-envisioning what their organization looks like in terms of capturing and really optimizing what they get out of these large accounts?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there's a couple different things going on. And I was actually thinking about that in context of this conversation, because I was listening to your podcast a couple weeks ago and you asked a similar question. You were having a dialogue with Sherry Leviton. And the question comes down to, and the assertion that she was making that I disagree with a little bit. So we can just get controversial right away. But companies are having to fundamentally rethink their process, because the reality of data and the reality of the subscription economy and this dynamic change is what got you to the party doesn't keep you at the party. Number one, the larger the organization you're in, the bigger and more acute this problem is, and the more moving pieces you have. And the third piece that I think really informs the question you ask is really changing the frame, which starts from a change in mindset, getting out of the old world mindset of what's our strategy for the customer. Because what's our strategy for the customer in plain English means what are we selling today, right? And what it needs to move to is what's the customer strategy and how do we help? How do we help them solve their problem? If we can work back from that, we have a whole different dialogue. And let me give you an example of what I'm talking about.
Sure.
So we were part of, and I was part of our team helping Workday orchestrate their sales kickoff last year. And when you talk to Doug Robinson, who runs North America for Workday, what he says is what we're trying to drive and what we think the differentiation is changing the mindset in the organization from inside out thinking to outside in thinking. Not why are we good, how are we going to win, but do we really deeply understand our customers and their markets and their needs, and that we can uniquely understand the art of the possible with them, and then we're speaking their language on their terms, that we absolutely are the solution provider. Because when it comes to the finish line, particularly selling big, multi and hundreds of $1 million ERP deals, it's not about feature function.
Right.
It's about relationship, it's about trust, it's about expertise, and it's about our commitment to those customers. And if we don't go outside in and start from where they're at, we don't win.
Well, let me ask a question on that. Is because this is nothing new, right? I mean, we've had customer-centric selling out for a couple decades, if not more now, and so on. I'm always curious, like, this sort of seems to be like, newfound religion for for people. Yep. It's like, no, this is always how it should have been done. So when you're dealing with these big organizations and they're sort of saying, we're going from inside out to outside, it's like, what have you been doing?
Yeah, and I think the thing, what's interesting, going back to a question you asked a second ago about what's the different and kind of the why is this happening, which changes the behavior. If you step back and use Workday as an example, but it's just an illustrative point, right? Mm-hmm. Workday became a leader in cloud computing by having best-in-class HR capabilities.
Right.
That was the early phase. The new phase, or the future for them, is they want to own ERP for the Global 2000. And the reality of that, from a day-to-day set of behavior, skills, and capabilities in sales and across the revenue team, is the fact that they were best in class and really compelling selling to HR, HR systems, right, is not the same discipline as selling to the CFO or the CEO mm-hmm. around ERP and a full suite of the back office.
Right.
And so what that means is if I'm going to make the team capable of this, and part of the change that they're going through in that example, but Honeywell going from selling power plants to actually selling contracts to run plants over decades, mm-hmm. is I've got to rethink everything, but I've got to start that from coming from where the customer is, not from a product, service, and a drive-by. And the other challenge, kind of what have they been doing, is the old world selling that was transactional and drive-by and perpetual is now much more about usage and consumption and relationships and outcomes. And so while I think the best-in-class sellers have always been focused on the high ground and the people and problems, organizationally, that's not how everyone behaved.
Well, it's interesting to hearing you talk about that, because when you're referring to old world, mm-hmm. To me that smacks of, that's sort of what we've been doing the last 10, 15 years. And what we're really doing is, in some respects, we're going back to yes. what we were doing before that. So for many people, when they talk about old world, it's like, 30, 40 years ago. It's like, no. And this is I think is really relevant, because I think that, there's been this sort of Bible around how we sell subscription services that has been tried to be applied across all types of industries, all types of sales, and where it may be appropriate for a more transactional, for a more complex. Yeah, I've always had my doubts, and I've talked to plenty of companies that also had their doubts, is that, it actually sort of looks more like what we were doing in the past from a mission standpoint. Some of the execution elements may be different, but what we're trying to achieve, because I remember, early in my career selling mainframe computers to big companies, is that, as part of a team working with somebody that managed the whole account. Yep. And we had, complete integrated team of supporting them on all levels, sales, revenue optimization, And it sounds like we're sort of heading back that way, which I think in some cases is good.
I think it is good. And it's, you talk to best in class sales leaders and salespeople, and you've talked about this a lot on your show as well, that, hey, there's this notion of empathy, right? And it starts from coming from a genuine place of, tell me what's going on and how can I help? And I had a great learning tutorial about that from a sales leader at GE last year, I guess it was 2 years ago. And he was talking about being the global account lead on a big account. So his team, the universe of people touching the customer, was north of 70 people, mm-hmm. right? And he finally came around the corner of, hey, more is not more, and they're not going to buy us because of the feature function and the new innovative tech. And maybe I need to rethink my role because I don't understand them well enough.
Right.
So he said, I went back and I sat down with the senior person at the customer, and I said, hey, tell me what's going on, and help me understand a little bit better so I can figure out how I can help. And he said, they kind of looked at me like I had three heads. And it took about 10 minutes for the customer to finally understand he was coming from a genuine place. He didn't come with an agenda or a new sales sheet or or whatever. He was trying to step back and get in their head and find out what's going on. And he said, I had one of the most humbling experiences of my career because the customer sat back and kind of cocked his head and looked at me and said, I've been waiting to have this conversation with you for almost 10 years.
Right.
And he said it hit me like a ton of bricks. So it forced him, and it was part of the organization rethinking, around account planning to say, hey, we've got great technology and it's 10 miles wide and 10 miles deep. That's not what matters. What matters is, to the point you were talking about a second ago, Andy, is, hey, this is a little bit back to the future. Do we really understand the people and the problems? Do we really understand the guy on the other side of the desk? And have we walked in his or her shoes? And are we coming from a place of genuine empathy and trying to solve a problem? If the answer is yes, we're going to win, and all the other AI in the world doesn't matter.
Well, and it's interesting, to talk about the empathy, because I think that this is one of these areas where we do such a poor job of training salespeople, is that everybody's sort of familiar with sort of the emotional empathy, that is sort of the common terms, right? I can feel your pain type thing, which doesn't really help you in sales. What really helps you in sales is say, I understand why you feel the way you do. And not just how you feel, but why you feel the way you do. And that cognitive empathy puts you in a position to problem solve with people.
Yep.
But that is the part that's so often missing, is that we think just because what we oftentimes talk about as empathy, I think was really sympathy, right? And people don't want your sympathy, they want your understanding. How do we cross that bridge, right? Because I think this is a huge gap for many sellers, and it's the one that prevents them from really optimizing their own performance.
No matter where your sales team is working from, RingDNA can enable them to be more productive and effective. RingDNA offers a complete platform for remote sales teams that gives reps the tools they need to connect with more prospects and create more opportunities and drive more revenue no matter where they're working from. And managers can get real-time insight they need to coach reps to success. Win more deals from anywhere on the planet with RingDNA. Learn more about how RingDNA helps remote teams at ringdna.com/remote work. That's ringdna.com/remote work.
New alarm bells ringing tonight on the coronavirus outbreak in this country.
Doctors say the virus is spread through droplets when someone coughs or sneezes.
And I think the business community, it's in their interest that people actually stay home and stop the spread.
For a business that can allow more employees to telecommute, we want you to do that.
Hi, friends. I'm Andy Paul, host of the Sales Enablement Podcast, and I want to encourage you to listen to my brand new special 6-part podcast mini-series titled Selling with Purpose. The team behind Sales Enablement Podcast and I put together this incredible series of inspiring conversations exploring what it means to sell with a mission greater than just hitting your numbers in this era of COVID-19 and beyond. So tune in to hear from world-class enterprise sales leaders and learn how their 6 companies will close $50 billion selling remotely. See how they've supported essential workers with the products and services they need to stay safe and thrive during this time of crisis. Subscribe to Selling with a Purpose now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yeah, I think my observation would be a couple things on that track. One is trying to get to the next level in terms of the so what. So it's one thing to say I'm trying to solve this problem. Well, first it's getting clear on what exactly is the problem and what does it mean in actual practice, both in terms of what are the business impacts, but getting into the next level questions of help me understand why it's not working today or what you mean when you said X, and really decoding the term, because I think we sometimes, and I'm certainly guilty of this, you get the headline and skip to the end because you think you already know. You've already got the trigger that, oh, this is how I'm going to sell this thing and solve that problem. When you don't deeply understand why it's important, what the alternatives are, what are the business impacts and also the personal impacts.
Which are huge.
Also, yeah, totally. And one of my observations, one of my tells, particularly when I'm listening to opportunity reviews and account plan reviews, is can the person articulate not just the problem we're solving and who it matters to, but can they also articulate what's important to these people and what's the personal win?
Yes.
And if you understand the people and some of the personal wins, even if it's like I just am too stressed out, that helps inform what's going on, then you can be much more artful and you can come from a much more genuine place that allows some of those breakthroughs that translate into meaningful relationships and meaningful wins.
Yeah, I mean, everybody likes to think that people are purely self-interested, and we always use the "what's in it for me" type. But yeah, I turn that on the head with questions. Say we should be asking "what's in it for you" questions, because that's ultimately when you're talking with someone is you want to bring it down to what does it mean to you personally. If you make this change, what is the impact on you personally? Is that an opportunity or is that a negative? I mean, and it's if you're going to try to put yourself in a position of influence with that person, you got to understand that.
Yep, that's right.
Well, it's interesting, listening to you talk, because so much of what you're referring to is, and this is obviously speaks to my sweet spot, which is all the technology and process and so on notwithstanding, is this is still a human business that we're in. And yes, even in an account where you said you may have 70 points of contact with the buyer, maybe you want to skinny that down a little bit, but it's still about the human aspect, the human connection, the human-to-human part of it, that we just seem to want to glom over, right? We think that technology will take the place of that, or to your point earlier is, somebody's read a persona about a specific buyer and they think, okay, I understand exactly what this person's all about. And I read a term recently I thought was really interesting. It was a professor, I think, from Pepperdine University used it as intellectual humility.
Yes.
And I think it's a great term for sort of what's missing so often in sales. And it's certainly, again, a focus of the way, a function of the way that we train and onboard people is, do you have the humility to understand what you don't know?
Right.
Rather than think that you're going to look better by, and think you establish your credibility by assuming or presuming that you know everything.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the other thing, and I was talking to an analyst from Ovum yesterday, and he used the phrase that struck with me as soon as he said it, which I think maps is the resulting impact on if you can practice that intellectual humility and empathy and go deep with the customer is, being able to sense and react and respond in such a way that you're perceived by the customer as being persistently relevant. Mm-hmm. And I thought, like that whole notion of like, okay, if the default setting from the customer perspective is I'm trying to figure this out and I know somebody or a set of somebody who can help me, like if you become part of that extended, brain power and that extended decision, criteria, that's the high ground about, trusted advisor that everybody's trying to get to. Yeah. Is you got to be persistently relevant. I got to be when in doubt or when the moves get tough, I know exactly who I'm calling and somebody's going to help work through the problem and do it from a genuine place where it doesn't all necessarily decode to what am I selling you?
Yeah, it's interesting. This thought sprung to mind when you talk about that. I remember reading this article in the last couple of years, I think in the New Yorker magazine, about this philosopher, scientist, who's saying that, look, really, we need to rethink what we consider the brain to be. Mm. And he's saying, the brain is no longer just this organ inside our skulls, but actually given our access to all the information in the world on our phones and so on, is that our brain has really been extended, right? It includes all this knowledge that exists somewhere else that we can easily tap. And it just sort of occurred to me as you were speaking that, if you're in that trusted advisor role, you really become an extension of that person's brain. Yep. That you are information that they know they can access, which is what the brain's doing, it's retrieving thoughts, that they know how to access it. And that's what a valuable place to be.
Yeah, and that's the network effect in actual practice in sales, and that's the difference between the really great ones and everybody else, is that you're part of, you've got a multimodal, multi-sets of networks that you're connected into, and you're part of facilitating something that, at scale becomes really, really powerful.
Well, and this idea of persistent relevance, I like, because you had earlier mentioned, you said, how you can be of value in every call. And for me, this is such a simple sales thought that so many sellers don't have, so many sales managers don't have, which is, and I've written about this extensively, is that I believe in every time you interact with a buyer, they have to finish that interaction closer to making a decision than they were when they started it. Otherwise, what was the point? Yep. And it doesn't matter whether it's an email, a phone call, a video call like we're doing here, whatever, an in-person call, if they don't finish that interaction, if they haven't made progress, and this comes from, Gartner talks about this in the study they did 2 years ago about buyer enablement and so on, is that, the metrics that their buyers that they survey were using for the value of their sales interactions was progress, right?
Yes.
It seems pretty amorphous, but, people know it when it happens. And so, I advocate for sales leaders. I said, if you're going through doing a pipeline review, you should be able to ask every seller about every qualified opportunity in their pipeline, what's in the next step? What's the value the customer expects from us in the next step to help them move closer to making a decision?
100% agree.
And if the seller doesn't know the answer, well, then they're not doing their job, right? They need to be coached about the questions they should be asking, the discovery they're doing, because they shouldn't be able to leave that previous meeting without knowing the answer to that next question.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that's also one of the cultural dynamics I see shifting on a couple different fronts in terms of a little bit of this back to the future with sales, that the old disciplines become more critical than ever is, one, you need to be able to answer that question. Did we deliver value, and did we deliver it as according to the customer's perspective on value?
Right.
But also making it an opportunity to have some simple coaching on a regular basis, because what I consistently see when you do that, either in context of a one-on-one, much less you do an opportunity review or a deal review, what we would call a test and improve here at Altify, where it's a more structured process, is also making it a safe space for the rep or for the team member to say, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the tells is always, well, I think, right? So as soon as rep gets into I think, we know we're disconnected here. Like, timeout, full stop.
I've got an even better one. So, the seller's knowledge of what they need to do next is in inverse proportion to how defensive they get when you ask the question.
Yes.
And so the more defensiveness you get, the more you know that, okay, let's just stop here. We're not going to go down this path. Let's deconstruct this and see what's going on.
Yeah, that's right. What I consistently hear and observe from sales leaders that I talk to is, particularly in those review sort of situations, not necessarily the full-blown QBR, but even in an account review or a deal review, is right away you can class them into one of three buckets, because the ones that right away get into the story of the deal or the story of the account, and there's a lot of this, don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah,
that means they haven't done the homework. They're not prepared. They haven't
had the conversations they need to have.
A lot of times they haven't. There's sort of the mid-level, which is, again, there's some data, there's some structure, but there's a lot of I think, or our theory is, or we suspect, instead of, here's the evidence, here's what we heard, here's how we triangulated and validated, here's the evidence that directs us. And then there's the masterclass folks who go directly into the plan and start walking through people, problems, outcomes, metrics, and a lot of precision about who's doing what, how it's being evaluated.
Yeah. Well, you brought the term metrics, so I did want to get back to a topic we had talked about before. We started touching on data in sales. And to me, this is such a problematic area, right? We have all this potential because we have the ability to collect so much data, and yet we seem to still struggle with making sense out of it in a way that's relevant to making us more effective. And it's compounded by people online writing articles based on data that are making assumptions or conclusions about data that are just mind-bogglingly wrong. And so, interested in your opinion about how we're going to come through that, because we just don't know how to use it right now.
Well, I would assert to you that part of the answer to the question really gets back to this idea of customer revenue optimization, which is grounded in methodology, which means, the same language, and to the point you were raising a second ago, Andy, it's what outcome do we expect and what value did we deliver at each step, right? And when you start to think about what great selling looks like, and more often than not, the problem statement that we encounter starts in one of two places. Either I need to improve my sales velocity, which is some combo platter of win rates or deal sizes, or I just need to drive more there through the funnel, or the account planning side of the equation, which is I need more pipeline, right? When you get underneath the numbers, particularly on the opportunity level, it's not just the numbers, it's the underlying behavior, and do we understand the same thing in the same way every day?
Right.
So example would be, I'll give you one of our customer examples, Autodesk. So Autodesk uses a derivative, fundamentally of the TAS methodology, the 1 to 20, as part of their standard operating procedure around opportunity management. And so that's, the base case of that for anybody who's been asleep and hasn't or didn't get subjected to this 20 years ago, starts from, the four key pillars of that is one, is there an opportunity?
Mm-hmm.
And then works its way into, can we compete? Can we win? And can we work? Is it worth winning?
Right.
And each of those have 5 questions beneath it. We did a data analysis with them and looked at 2 years worth of transaction data, both for smaller, deals as well as the enterprise deals. And what came out of that is, because they're instrumenting it in Salesforce, they're capturing this criteria and capturing yes, no, maybes to the 1 to 20. But in smaller deals, it's really what they call the critical 6. There are 6 questions that matter. What they found is if they had a yes to the critical 6, whether you're talking about a mid-market deal, say $50K,
right,
or you're talking about an enterprise deal in the millions of dollars, their win rate went up by 84% when they could answer yes to those 6 questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd argue, for all the high-flying data and all the depth of things we can get into and all the complex models, there's a really base element of this, again, back to the future here, of the growth of enterprise selling, which is, it doesn't matter what sales methodology you use, and large, long-standing companies have their own hybrids of what that looks like, borrowing the best of and what the sales leaders like over time. You got to instrument it, and you got to get into not just what are the headlines around win rates, but you have to look at the underlying behaviors that are captured to decompose. Are we talking about the same thing in the same way? Can we identify things like, sponsorship or mentorship or, economic buyer, whatever you call it? How many of those do we have, and how do we know? Is there, formal criteria, informal criteria? Is there a compelling event? You got to be able to decode those signals across the B2B landscape. That really is the insight that I think moves the needle on sales results and impact.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the whole topic of data in sales and the way we use it. And people that follow me know I'm a big soccer fan. And one of the things that's sort of fascinating me is I look at how they structure their management teams and management staffs for soccer teams. And they become very specialized in the roles that they have. And I wonder, this is sort of a model we should be following in sales, because they oftentimes will have, 2 or 3 coaches directly responsible for performance of some sort. One could be nutrition, fitness, one could be, on-field performance, and so on. And they collect huge amounts of data. I mean, every player is wearing a full-time monitor during their training and during the game. So they know every step they took, the sprints they did, the longer runs. I mean, all this stuff. They can break it down. And they look at it and say, how can we then work with you as an individual, taking this data to say, here are the areas, and this is not it's not the manager that's doing that. It's these specialized coaches.
Yep.
And I just wonder whether we're really missing a bet, because right now we're sort of requiring sales leaders to be sort of these jacks of all trade, rather than saying, look, we can bring in some specialists, instead of just saying sales enablement, saying, no, have you ever met a sales team that has a director of performance on staff?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up in a couple different veins. One is back to Autodesk for a second. They have a series of performance coaches, and they're actually putting them in sales hubs, and they talk about it in terms of black hat thinking and coaching. And what they're doing is bringing seasoned sales leaders in from the outside and making them coaches in their sales hubs around the world. Actually seen as a sign of respect and investment and importance when the teams get a coach assigned. Right. Because you get somebody with 20, 30 years of sales experience dropped into your patch or dropped into working on accounts and stuff with you, who doesn't have a quota, who doesn't have an agenda, and is all about trying to help you coach.
Right.
I think there's an emerging element, and we've tried to bake some of this into the software capability that we have too. It's all about how do you get those signals and how do you enable more high fidelity coaching, and how do you build skills over time? And it goes back to a topic we were hitting on with the Back to the Future theme here, is this idea that, in the old world of selling, there was, sort of the three buckets, right? You got the top, 10 or 15% that move the needle and break your comp model.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the broad middle that you're trying to turn C's into B's, and then you've got that lower tier that you're going to flip over anyway. The implication of what you're suggesting, and I think where the world is moving in the application of data, is not just the personalization element, but it starts foundationally from the idea everyone deserves to be coached.
Right.
And in the example you're using with, the top tier, the premiership teams on the pitch are over-analyzing everything, trying to figure out for every role, for every individual, how do we help them perform a little bit better? And that same mindset absolutely needs to be translated to best-in-class revenue teams, because the top, the best of the best are getting coaching in all those different dimensions,
right,
and data and feedback. And that's got to be the application of that data to help everybody get a little better every day, every week, every month, is where the opportunity is to fundamentally change the game.
Yeah, I think it brings up a couple interesting points too, because I think that one of the things that they really emphasize in these top professional sports leagues, and it's, soccer in particular, is that there's two aspects to a person. There's the person and there's the athlete.
Mm-hmm.
See, and I think as more and more time I spent in sales, which has been decades at this point, but more time spent analyzing this, I think that the top performers tend to be those people that are more comfortable with sort of the basic human elements of sales, right? The connection with somebody else, to being a good person, being trustworthy. We can go through these list of attributes. And I was reading this article that was really interesting about a year or so ago about, I forget which soccer team, it might have been Liverpool, my team that I obsess about. And they said, when we first get them into the team, whether it's the first team or their academy, their lower level team, he says, we train them how to be a person first before a player. Teach them how to take responsibility for their lives, how to have the discipline to train, to eat right off the field, and that stuff's all obsessively monitored too. But I thought there was such an interesting description of it, because we don't do any of this in sales. We don't train people how to be human, how to be better people. We assume they come into the job knowing how this is supposed to be, and it's clearly not the case. And so it's like we have to sort of say, okay, how do we? This is another area of performance coaching. How do we train people how to be better humans in order to help them be better salespeople?
Well, yeah, that's probably a whole series of podcasts and discussions about how to do that, and how to be simultaneously the best version of yourself that your mom would be most proud of, and be the highest sales performer that who's taking on the big hardware and the big checks at club and going to club. But I think there's a couple foundational elements that you're kind of pointing to, particularly when you think about the discipline of sales and the revenue team, which starts with communication. Mm-hmm. I saw a statistic, I think it was a state of sales report from Salesforce, where they talked about the fact that 80%, when you look at the top required skills or requested skills when you're looking for sales leadership, is communication. Mm-hmm. Which begs the question, how many sales leaders have ever had communications training? Yeah, including listening, or even just where are the high value questions, and how do you have this dialogue, right? Answer is far fewer and far less than we'd like. And then you point that, you look at any given organization and say, talk to me about your center of excellence, your center of revenue performance, or your go-to-market team, or your sales enablement team, like whatever it's called, right? How many of those teams have that people first kind of, let's double click on you as a human and some core skills and some and attributes and traits that we expect you to exhibit as a foundation to here's what good looks like in selling in this organization.
Right. And this gets back to a point I was making before about the specialized skills we need in a management team that don't exist. As somebody, you'll call it communications, I'd call it relationships, right? And I know this term drives people crazy, but it's truly what it is how do we enable you to connect with another human being and form this utilitarian functional relationship that is the sales relationship. Yep. And I give people the example oftentimes. I don't know if you've ever watched the show on, I think it was HBO, Billions. You watch Billions?
I've seen it. I'm not an advocate of it.
But there's this character, Wendy, who's the staff psychologist or psychiatrist, and plays a very vital role for keeping people's mind focused and making them more human in this, trading environment that's exaggerated, but is, sort of the worst, brings out the worst behaviors in people.
Yep.
But think about how many sales teams would benefit from having, a therapist on staff one or 2 days a week. And we laugh at it, but if your sales jumped 5-10%, why the hell wouldn't you do it?
Totally.
And we're so afraid as a profession to explore any of this stuff that could have to me, it could transform how we help people become better at their jobs. And to your point about these middle class, I call it the sales middle class, right? The B's wanting to be C's. Yeah, oftentimes it's not their ability to necessarily, quote unquote, sell or product knowledge or customer knowledge. It's these other, more intangible qualities that really prevent them from achieving at the level that they could. And yet we don't give them any training on that.
Well, we don't. And I think we also don't give them a vision of why it's important. Not just functionally why it's important. It's going to help you make your quota. But, what this dialogue brings me to is I used to work with a guy who had an outsized impact on me for the time that I knew him, Glenn Davis, who ran, sales excellence and commercial excellence at United Healthcare at Optum. Mm-hmm. So he used to talk all the time about, deal fluency and client intimacy.
Right.
But it came from a place that was very much in the mindset of what you were talking about earlier with, Liverpool and the top tier teams are trying to instrument and really think about the best in class revenue, team as really elite athletes that
mm-hmm.
you need to take apart all the different behaviors and help in a variety of different aspects to help them be the best versions of themselves. But his point of view was sales is not just a profession and it's not just a discipline. Actually, Glenn's argument was sales is a vocation. It's a higher calling. So if you
mm-hmm.
come from a place that this is not, we all, can stereotype the used car salesman,
right.
Cheap and cheerful, kind of crappy experiences. His point of view is this is a discipline that you want to get to be world-class about. It is a higher calling. And when you are really expert in this, when you can fundamentally change, the customers' lives and the behaviors, then amazing things happen.
Yeah.
And if that's your mindset and forms all these other behaviors, then what you're talking about here is right on point.
And I think it starts right at the beginning. And so this is another one of my big bugaboos is that we try to say, look, onboarding takes this long. And if you're not going to, come up to speed in this period of time, then suddenly you're shifted down. If they don't get rid of you, you're suddenly a B player. Yep. And then we all know that all sorts of behaviors kick in with sales managers, uneven lead distribution, They just serve to reinforce that. And again, back from reading about soccer and soccer management, because I think they do such a fabulous job of what they call man management and male teams, but person management is they say, look, with anybody in sort of this athletic endeavor is you can't predict that aha moment where it all starts making sense. Mm-hmm. And teams will invest in the development of players, and some guys maybe at 18 years old it kicks in. Other guys it might be 22 years old that it kicks in. And yet we apply increasingly, especially in the more transactional, SaaS business, we apply this broad brush, 90 days, 30 days up to speed. Yep. Where if we're more individual about it, is that, hey, what's the deal with 90 days? I mean, you've invested all this money in this person. Maybe they need 180 days. Maybe they need a year. Mm-hmm. And yet, you'd benefit so much taking that person rather than trying to find another person to replace them after 6 months. It'd still be to your benefit to keep them for a year to see if it kicks in and to help them in a way that it kicks in. And yet we seem this intolerance for, diversity in terms of how long it takes people to come up to speed.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the tyranny of the short-term quarterly thinking. Yeah, is everything we take the wrong notes out of the data and decompose into where are you on the sales ladder and where are you in the ramp, and if those two numbers don't look decent pretty quickly, then suddenly you're a second-class citizen or worse.
Yeah,
as opposed to playing the long game, and I'm sure you've had countless conversations of people who had to spend 2, 3, 4, 5 years in an account before they really cracked the code. That there's the people element, there's also the environmental element, there's the client situation, there's a whole bunch of other things that get into hey, how do we get to success, and how
Right.
do we build those relationships that turn into meaningful, commercial value over time.
Yeah. All right, Pat, unfortunately, we need to cut off. This is we didn't answer any of the questions I had lined up, but this is a fantastic conversation nonetheless.
Well, and I think we should take it on the road like we were talking about. You should come down to Austin. We can hang out and have some barbecue and try to do some field testing on some of these higher order issues. Or alternately, we can just go see a Liverpool game.
I'd say both. So you're a soccer fan as well?
I'm an aspirational fan. I like that. And the thing I love the most is actually going or watching soccer with true soccer fans, because the songs, the backstories, the religion, and all the other stuff, it's just fun to be a part of, where I don't have to know the details of the players. I just want to be part of the experience.
Yeah, well, I've been fortunate to go to one Premier League game in person, and it was a lot of fun. It wasn't a great match, but just the environment was fantastic. But yeah, I still haven't been to Anfield to see Liverpool, so that's on my list. But yeah, we'll do both. Anfield and Austin.
I'm in.
And also Austin FC coming online in 2021. So
right on.
All right, Pat. Hey, tell people how they can get in touch with you before we take off.
Sure. You can, I'm, Patrick Morrissey on LinkedIn here at Upland Software. You can find me on the revenue optimization, podcast, online in Spotify or Apple or all your favorite podcast places. And you can find us at altify.com and uplandsoftware.com.
Perfect. All right, Pat, look forward to talking again soon.
Thanks much, Andy. Have a great day.
You too. Okay, friends, that was Accelerate for the week. First of all, as always, I want to thank you for joining me. And I want to thank my guest, Pat Morrissey. Join me again next week, as my guest will be Paul Smith. Paul is an author and an expert on storytelling, and it's a return visit for Paul. We previously spoke about his book, Sell with a Story, How to Capture Attention, Build Trust, and Close the Sale. And on next week's episode, we're going to dig into the topic of why stories really are important in sales, how to get better at telling them, and we'll also talk about Paul's new book, 10 Stories Great Leaders Tell. So you definitely want to check that out, and be sure to join Paul and me next week for that conversation. And before you go, don't forget to visit andypaul.com and get your copy of my Sales Growth Planner for 2020. Now, in this, I walk you through a step-by-step process to create an incredibly effective sales plan that will help you hit your targets in 2020. This is the same plan format I've used throughout my lengthy sales career as both an individual contributor and as a sales leader to hit my numbers year after year. So for more information, get your copy, visit andypaul.com/planner. That's andypaul.com/planner. So thanks again for joining me. Until next week, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.
RingDNA is the leading sales enablement platform that uses AI to help scale business growth. Trusted by the top companies across the globe, RingDNA offers a suite of powerful tools for every sales role. The RingDNA Dialer radically improves sales productivity and call connection rates, while guided selling helps reps know exactly what to do and when to do it. Conversation AI uses artificial intelligence to surface the most impactful coaching opportunities in real time. So, no matter where your team is working from, the RingDNA platform can help them exponentially increase call connections, opportunities, and revenue. Learn more at ringdna.com/platform. That's ringdna.com/platform.